all about municipalities leading the charge on EVs. I'm Alistair Pym, the Vice President of Innovation and Partnerships at ACT, the Alliance for Climate Transition. And we have a mission to accelerate the transition to clean energy and a diverse climate economy. I'll be joined by three panelists who I will introduce shortly. But just to give a bit of context to the background to this webinar, I thought I'd read you a bit out of the preface from the guidebook, which we're going to be talking about. Cities, counties, and towns across the country are on the front lines of the clean transportation revolution. As climate change intensifies and transportation remains one of the largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions, local governments are being called upon to take action. The transition to EVs is no longer a distant goal, it's an immediate necessity. Yet with shifting federal policies, new financing opportunities, and evolving utility regulations, navigating this transition can feel overwhelming for municipal leaders. So that's why the Alliance for Climate Transition, ACT, and the Syracuse University Dynamic Sustainability Lab, or DSL, have partnered to create this guidebook and help communities reach their decarbonization goals. So today on the webinar, we're going to talk about those shifting federal policies. We're going to talk about what's going on at city level, and we'll talk about the guidebook as well. So with that, let me introduce our three speakers, if we can have their videos on. I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Jay Golden, who is the director of this Dynamic Sustainability Lab at Syracuse University and has been a partner of ours for a couple of years now. By Karen Apple, who's the EV program manager at the City of Phoenix, and John Lushetsky, who is a senior VP at ML Strategies, which is part of MINTS, who's one of our long-term sponsors. So I'd like you all to introduce yourselves briefly, 1 or 2 minutes, and just explain sort of where you fit into this ecosystem of people helping municipalities, or actually doing the work, Karen, as municipalities electrify their fleets. So let's start with Dr. Jay.
Well, thank you, Alistair, and thank you for everybody who's attending today. I'm really happy to be part of this and for our continued partnership with ACT. On the screen, you actually see 2 of our more recent reports, and let me first introduce the lab itself. So at Syracuse University, I'm the Pontarelli Professor of Environmental Sustainability and Finance, though my PhD is in engineering. And I direct a approximately 50-person, 50, paid researcher lab of students, undergraduate and graduate from across the university. And we're a nonpartisan think tank and research lab that also includes other faculty and external advisors from industry and government. And what we are known for and what we focus on is providing insights, strategies for both industry and governments at different levels on sustainability transitions and energy transitions. So we try to identify the risk and unintended consequences as well as the opportunities that are afforded by these transitions. And as part of that, we focus on energy and mobility transitions. And so the 2 reports that you see in front of you are some of the more recent reports put out. The one on the left really discusses what are the budget implications for states as well as local governments from the EV transition, both from a revenue standpoint as well as from an expenditure standpoint. And that was supported by the Pew Foundation. Following that, we had been doing work for the Council of Governments at the state level. We were asked to do some research for multiple states on the East Coast and testified before them, and found that there is a need to support local governments at the county level, village level, city level in regard to the EV transition. Again, from spanning not only the financing part, but the implementation, which I'm sure Karen Apple from the City of Phoenix will provide even greater insights. So we partnered with ACT, and we're really excited that today this report, and you'll see it later, is available online for free And as both of these reports are at our website, and we hope that you take a look at it, give us feedback, and anything that we can do to further support your organizations, we'd be happy to do so. So I'll end it there.
Thank you, Dr. J. Over to Karen Apple.
Yeah, hi, good morning from the fifth largest city in the United States, Phoenix, Arizona. Happy to be here and thank you, Alistair, for the invite. My name is Karen Apple. I'm the EV Program Manager for the City of Phoenix. I've been in this role for going into my fourth year, and mostly I'm responsible for EV charger deployment for the public and employees. I work with our Public Works Department on fleet transitions and fleet charging, work in the equity policy atmosphere, also work with workforce development in the EV space, and work with our planning department to get EV-ready building codes implemented and passed through City Council. And last but not least, which I think is one of the most important things, is education and outreach on EV transitions and promotions and adoption. And just to give you some context of where we're at in Phoenix and why we're even looking at electrification is because we have some really big air quality challenges. We get an F in air quality from the American Lung Association. And probably most of you know that the largest greenhouse gas emitting sector is mobile sources. So we have missions to improve our air quality and decrease greenhouse gas emissions. And again, there's several ways to do that, between promoting active transportation, installing EV chargers, and doing those promotions. So that's kind of where we're sitting. And we do have a couple goals I'll mention. We have a goal of having 280,000 EVs in the city of Phoenix by 2030. Right now, we're sitting at about 25,000. And we also have a goal of 500 EV chargers on city-owned property by 2030. Right now, we're sitting at about 316. And another goal of 200 EVs in our fleet by 2030. Right now, we have about 80. So we certainly have jumped off the starting mark, and we are headed down the road, and we've got full support from council and the mayor. So I'll stop there, but glad to be here today.
Thank you, Karen. And over to you, John.
Thank you, Alistair, and thank you for inviting Mints and ML Strategies to be a part of this webinar today. Again, my name is John Lashetsky. I'm a Senior Vice President with ML Strategies based in Washington, D.C. For those of you who aren't familiar with Mints, it's a top 100 US-based law firm with one of the longest standing clean tech practices in the United States among law firms. We have been involved in clean tech almost before clean tech 1.0, if you will. My background is 15 years with the Department of Energy, working in a number of different clean energy programs. I was the acting Deputy Assistant Secretary overseeing the Vehicle Technologies Program for a period of time. And then prior to coming to DOE, early part of my career, I was involved with an electric vehicle battery startup, working with cities and major auto OEMs to sort of advance electric vehicles at a very, very early stage of what we all see here right now. So my background and my focus is very much on the Department of Energy, and also what's going on Capitol Hill in terms of federal policy and legislation to advance clean energy in general. And certainly a lot of that discussion right now is focused on clean vehicles and electric vehicles. So again, very happy to be part of the panel here today and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, John. So I'm going to ask a bunch of questions to the panelists in a second, but before I start, I just wanted to tell the audience that we will leave some time for Q&A at the end. So please think about the questions you want to ask, and then if you scroll down at the bottom, you'll see a box with Q&A in it. That's where you can enter your questions, and I'll be looking at those as that time arrives later on during the webinar. The chat is disabled, so I won't be looking there. So John, question for you, right? You're fresh from the DOE. You're now in DC, so you're hearing a lot of what's going on. We'd love to get your update on what you think is happening with all of the recent executive orders, affecting policies, incentives, grants, etc. So please give us a sort of the cliff notes of what you think is happening.
Sure, I'll do that, and I'll try to be thorough and brief at the same time. But what we try to remind everybody right now is, we still haven't even passed the 90-day point, the 100-day point, which is generally a significant milestone for any new administration coming in to really sort of establish a direction and boundaries for policy, regardless of really what we're talking about, but certainly energy policy, that's true. The caveat on that, obviously, is that the Trump administration has been here before. They had some significant time to prepare for the transition and for some of the policy directions that they would pursue. And so they come into this with some amount of blueprint already formed. Not positive for the electric vehicle industry or those involved in deployment of electric vehicles in the United States is that this administration has made comments and statements that aren't favorable to that, and specifically referring to a lot of the programs and initiatives that were launched in the previous administration by the Biden team through the Inflation Reduction Act. And those have been obviously viewed as very significant catalysts to electric vehicle adoption, and whether or not it's the 30D tax incentives for purchasing electric vehicles, the 30C tax incentives for charging infrastructure, the NEVI grants that would flow down to a state municipal level for charging infrastructure, at that level. All of those things, I think, are certainly, if not being targeted for elimination, certainly under threat right now. And nobody should gloss over that fact. The thing, though, that we remind our clients is that those programs do have a very significant constituencies, and not just on the Democratic side. On the House side, they are working with a relatively thin margin. I think approximately 8 votes on the House Republican side, if they were actually to put in legislation that would rescind these programs. And there are a lot of benefits that are flowing into what we call red districts, districts that may have voted for the Trump administration or have Republican representatives. They still see the economic benefits of these programs, which we think will, if not be an obstacle, it will certainly at least be a limiting factor in what actually happens. So that is, I think, the dynamic that we're dealing with in Washington right now. It's definitely headwinds. It's not tailwinds. And again, we shouldn't gloss over that. But there are still some significant, deals that need to be made on budget right now. Both House and Senate are involved in budget reconciliation talks, which is a process that they can go through to reconcile some budget measures, both on the tax incentive side, which would affect things like 30D and 30C, and also on the spending side, which would impact things like NEVI grants and some of the other grants that are going on as well. And, we expect to have more clarity over the next 30, 60 days, which, may be a great topic for a follow-on webinar, Alistair, with this team and this group and maybe others, as we kind of fully digest what's going to come out of Washington. But I'll stop there. I'm sure there's plenty of other questions, but I want to cede the mic to my other panelists and look forward to the discussion.
That's great, John. Thanks for the summary. Yeah, definitely come back with a few follow-ups. But let's move to Dr. J. And, knowing that this landscape was coming, can you tell us a little bit about the guidebook and kind of what municipalities and states can do without federal funding? Where can they take the lead?
Yeah, I just want to follow up one quick thing that John said. So when we refer to NEVI, we're referring to the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Formula Program. And that was authorized with the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, Bipartisan Inflation Reduction Act. But on February 6th of this year, the Federal Highway Administration sent out a memo to all state DOTs stating that the Federal Highway Administration will suspend $3 billion in previously approved funds for construction projects. And the NEVI was really focused on trying to install fast charging stations every 50 miles on highways. But the $7,500 tax incentive for charging for vehicles, as well as the tax credit, as well as $1,000 for charging, is still available. However, the issues that we face right now are the tariffs. And so we're going to have tariffs that will impact not only passenger cars, but also other types of fleet vehicles. And so that's going to be an impact for all. And for those to understand that how it's escalated, just look at the news today as Elon Musk is going straight at Peter Navarro, the leader of the tariff program, because it's going to impact all, especially even Tesla, which is an American brand, but still has components from all over the world. So that's one part. And then the other thing I'll just say is, in regards to both reports we showed, is that both the states as well as local agencies don't fully appreciate, as a general statement, the budgetary issues associated with making the right decision to the EV transition, without question. But the Congressional Budget Office last year put out a report that the Highway Trust Fund is going to go broke. No states like to add increased fuel tax. And so you have the issue of vehicles which are 30% heavier. You're going to need more energy utility infrastructure. The American Society for Civil Engineers gives our rating about a C- for our highways and bridges that affects local governments. So the local governments are going to be put in, as well as states. The local governments are going to have a huge, huge role moving forward, because most of the roads and infrastructure are managed by cities, not by states. So having said all that, that's why we're so excited, because we're going to see a large transfer, if you will, in leadership, especially as we've had more and more agency personnel cuts throughout the federal government. So it's going to be incumbent upon local jurisdictions and state jurisdictions to take the leadership. And that's the impetus for the guidebook, trying to lay out a tapestry of what the local jurisdictions are going to be faced with and how they can overcome that and take leadership through best management practices, which we extracted from cities like Phoenix and across the country that are committed to this type of effort, or to now navigating these efforts. And happy to talk through all that, but I'm sure Karen can really eloquently talk about on the ground, the nation's 5th largest city, which is surrounded by some of the largest cities in the country themselves, and kind of the leading role that the city of Phoenix must play for the nation.
Yeah, so Karen, you explained that you're doing a lot already, which is great. So congratulations. And you've got a plan and some goals. And you kind of told us where you are about sort of against those goals. So definitely making progress, which is great. But have you seen already any impacts from the shifting federal policies? And kind of how do you, if you think of the financing of what you're doing, how much of that is federal, how much of that is local, and what do you think you can do in the future locally without, with that gap in federal funding maybe?
Yeah, that's a great question. I definitely have seen direct impacts from the pause on federal funding. I'm very dependent upon federal funding. While I have mayor and council support for EV charging, what I don't have is a lot of local funding, which hopefully we are having a new sustainability director come on board, and I hope she's going to start working on that with our local mayor and council and budget folks to get more general fund dollars into this topic. But City of Phoenix submitted for 15 million for the charging and fueling infrastructure grant. We did not receive any funding in round one. We received 0 funding in round 1B, but we did get a good announcement when we got back in January from the holidays that we had been awarded $15 million for about 100 ports to go around on city-owned property. So libraries, parks, community centers, things like that. So we were excited, but only for a short time. That was about January 10th. We got noticed. And then on January 20th, when the new administration went in, that CFI charging and fueling money got put on pause. So that was a bit of a gut punch, thinking that we were going to be moving forward with 100 ports to meet our goals and to close some gaps in our charging deserts. So we are still in the hold pattern. I do have some, I like to call it drips and drabs funding. The county got some CFI funding. So they have a grant award signed. So they are going to subaward that out to different municipalities in the Maricopa County area. And you can believe that I will be on the front line with our handout for the city of Phoenix, trying to get 2 million, 3 million to put some charging in. If that money is in fact available, our local metropolitan planning organization, MAG, Maricopa Association of Governments, had some money for charging deployment. However, I was told that was linked to federal funding, so it's on hold. So long story short, I'm in a bit of a holding pattern. I have plans, which to me as a planner is very important. At least I know where my city has approved our chargers to be installed on city-owned properties. So that's a good thing. That's a silver lining. But I can't really go down the road very far without funding. So I'm very dependent. So Alistair, to your point, I'm about 90-10.
Okay.
90% dependent on federal and 10 on drips and drabs. And so I feel like I'm having to be very creative, look at different funding sources, whether it's local philanthropic organizations, look at other kinds of private-public partnerships. I'm telling people I look under every rock and every cave for funding. But if I don't have money, for funding right now, I'm trying to move the needle in other ways. We've got a big ride and drive coming up for education and outreach. So there are things I can do to help try to move the promotion and adoption needle.
That's
in the
great.
short term.
Alistair, can I jump in on that just for a sec?
Sure. Yep.
So I want to build up on what Karen said about the PPPs, the public-private partnerships, because what we have witnessed until the recent tariffs is a significant partnership between municipalities and private sector, specifically on modifying planning and zoning requirements as you have large grocery stores, you have brand new designs and new property designs for fast food restaurants that want to install charging networks for the community, sometimes for profit, obviously. And so there has been a significant push by the private sector because they see this as a positive business model. Now, that has kind of been put on pause just very recently, and we have no confidence in how this will all play out in regard to the tariff, just because of the cost of the supply chain components. But you will see, if it's been kind of nuanced a little bit, but there have been some major personnel changes where you have senior leadership from many of the automotive companies and also the EV industry that have been plucked by some of the largest food, beverage companies to help them develop their programs across the country. And we see it in Europe as well.
So have you seen any of that locally, Karen? Private companies building out their sort of retail charging?
Yeah, we have. And we've seen companies like the EV Goes and Electrify Americas coming in and putting DC charging hubs and or level twos at commercial facilities. We're seeing a push with, of course, the 7-Elevens, the Circle Ks. So they're certainly helping bridge some of those gaps in charging deserts. Can we do a lot more? Yes, but as I mentioned, funding is a little short right now.
So most of what you've said is about the charging infrastructure, but you said you'd already got, I think, 80 vehicles electrified, right? Out of a
Correct.
So just curious which type of vehicles, but also how is that being funded? Is that reliant on incentives and grants, or is there a different way you fund those vehicles?
Yeah, the funding is mostly internal from departments. They've had to budgeted for those vehicles. And then I'm always reminding them it's not just about a vehicle. You also have to budget for the fleet charging. So that comes out of the department budget. We don't have an offset budget that takes care of all this. It's really department dependent. Right now, the best, in my opinion, the best segment with the amount of vehicles to transition is the light duty.
Right.
So with your Chevy Bolts and your Ford F-150s and your Chevy Silverados, we do have one garbage truck that's been electrified. We've got some municipalities that have a few fire trucks that are electrified, and I know that there's street sweepers. So there are some medium and heavy duty transitions, but there's certainly a lot fewer than the light duty segment.
What about planning for maintenance as well? How's that going?
Yeah, that's an interesting challenge. We work with Ford and Chevy as our two OEMs. So I believe we outsource some of that back to the OEMs, but some of our technicians are getting EV ITP certified to do maintenance on our vehicles. That's important, and or getting training. And one of the questions I always ask my fleet teams, whether it's public or private, is, have you had to made any changes to your shops? Do you need different kinds of lifts or equipment or things like that? And right now they're not making that transition, but eventually you're probably going to have to look at your shift makeup or your shop makeup on the tools and training. So yes, that is an important piece to this.
So go back to something you said, I think, Jay, about the impact of tariffs. You know, it's uncertain what that'll mean for costs, but John, do you have any insight into how the tariffs might impact car prices? Even, you know, American, Karen mentioned Ford and Chevy, maybe even Tesla's one day. So, what do you think might happen? What's the impact you're seeing?
Yeah, I think it's, there's certainly, experts, in this area that, exceed my direct knowledge on this, but I think it's just widely known that, we're dealing with global supply chains for all vehicles, ICE vehicles, electric vehicles. And, on a case by case basis, I'm sure, every automaker right now and every tier 1 and tier 2 supplier is looking at the potential impact. I think, the real question is, and it's the question everyone in Washington is asking, is this going to be, a long-term, recalibration of trade policy with the United States? Is this a negotiating tactic that will be used and resolved, in weeks, if not months? And I think that's the real question: is what is it that the administration is ultimately looking for? What is the end goal? And obviously, the White House has said, this is to drive manufacturing to the U.S., which I think we all can agree is a laudable goal. But even if that is the case, those sorts of operations, whether it's a mothballed factory, a brownfield, or a greenfield, take years to really see the effect of. So, I think ultimately, this administration can be very pragmatic, and ultimately there will be a pragmatic solution here. But the exact timing for that, is still to be seen. So I think I'll just kind of leave it there.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's switch gears a bit. And Karen, you've developed a plan and goals, and you've definitely made progress. So, what resources did you look to help you think through that? Were there other guidebooks out there? Did you talk to your peers in other places? So, how did you develop all that?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I was, as I mentioned, I'm going into my 4th year. So when I was selected for this position, I have a transportation, aviation, and planning and environmental background. So I was fairly new to EVs. I've always had a love and passion for vehicles, so it didn't take me long to get ginned up in this space. But then COVID hit, so it allowed me, my silver lining to COVID was it allowed me to get on a lot of webinars, a lot of listservs, check in with my peer network. Didn't know who my peer network was, but I got on LinkedIn a lot and looked at folks that were in the industry. There's really good resources for municipalities at Fourth Mobile, Fourth organization. They deal with a lot with municipalities and policy. Electrification Coalition is another great tool and resource for municipalities. There's guidebooks, there's free or no cost fleet assessments that they will help municipalities go through. And then Plug in America is another good resource. They've got national resources. They're plugged in, pardon the pun, to what's going on at the Fed level. So between Fourth, Electrification Coalition, Plug in America, those are 3 great places to start. I've got great peers in the Clean Cities Denver. They've provided a lot of information. I reached out to people at Austin. Austin had really good EV programs. Of course, California is way ahead. So touching base with Sacramento, San Francisco, San Diego. And let me just share too, Alistair, that one of my best partners along this EV journey is my utilities. My utilities, because City of Phoenix is covered by 2 utilities. So I wouldn't be where I'm at. And I want to give a shout out to Salt River Project and Arizona Public Service. With their incentives, they've helped me move the needle on charger deployment with having some of the rebates and incentives and or fleet assessment programs. So please don't discount checking in with your utilities to see what they offer, because it's another way to get some no-cost resources, fleet assessments, rebates on chargers, and again, just a great partner for the City of Phoenix.
I don't know if you had a chance to look at our guidebook, the one that we partnered on with well, it's really the DSL guidebook that we partnered on. But did you see anything in there that's sort of new and could be helpful?
I think it was pretty much things that I knew and have been aware of. Again, I've been in this space for 4 years, so but I thought it was a great step through and provided input into things that municipalities, and again, we municipalities are at all different levels of starting in this ball game. Some people are in the 1st inning, some people are in the 5th inning. So it's great to actually have those steps that they can follow, because again, as Jay mentioned, we've got 15 municipalities around Phoenix, and some of them don't have the fortune to have an EV person sitting in their chair every day. So if there's resources like this that I can share, and I certainly will, to help them. If it's a fleet manager that's taking care of all of this, he's got a lot of he or she has a lot of duties. So if there's any resources that I can share, I certainly do, to help them step through. We have quite a few webinars for our municipalities, and I do find that everybody in this space is very giving of their time and information. So Jay, you've worked on some resources. They're no cost, great opportunity. Everybody has time, because I think everybody, and to maybe John's point, we're all in this together. We're all impacted, and we've all got this mission to improve our air and get the reliance off of those fossil fuels and get into cleaner options. So,
right, thank you. So Jay, Dr. Jay, do you want to highlight any things in particular in the guidebook to sort of, for any municipal leaders out there that are on the call?
Yeah, well, I want to build on what Karen said in that regard. So, the city of Phoenix is very fortunate to have Karen. But we have to remember most cities, towns, and villages, don't have that staff or the bandwidth at all, even county level. And so the other part of it is you need to take advantage of these resources, but you also need to have the leadership to pull not only, let's say, fleets together, but just think of, I'll give you an example. Karen mentioned, the two utilities, Arizona Public Service and Salt River Project. But any of the utilities, when they're not only getting pressure from the city and need guidance and support, but think about the large distribution centers that are popping up for the Amazons and others
Mhm.
around the country. And now you have them saying, look, we need fast charging stations for these new warehouses. It's an economic development necessity for our communities. But they're going to have to figure out, we have X number of requests for this. We just don't have the funding or the prioritization. So the local governments have to work with the utilities to try to identify from a planning standpoint, where are you going to prioritize the
Mhm.
expansion of 500 kV, 239 kV, et
Mhm.
cetera, all the transmission and distribution. And in fact, regional government leaders are going to need to come together because it's likely going to pass through multiple jurisdictions. And so they have to make the more of a unified decision as to where to have these investments from the utilities. So we're talking, that's a huge portion of this, as well as with your constituents, right? If you want to do economic development, which I haven't found one local government that doesn't want to do economic development, you have to start prioritizing and figuring out also what you're going to do for bonding. So it's not just an easy solution where we could say, okay, we're going to budget for a new set of fleet of vehicles, and it's what Karen said, et cetera, in regards to we have to really think holistically because this is a very complicated process, like most are for local jurisdictions as you get into new technologies. So that's I think a big consideration that most government and the government leaders need to be cognizant of.
Good point, Jay. And you bring up a sort of spark in my mind. The picture behind me is a charging hub for Prologis, which is one of these big warehouse companies, which leases their warehouses. So they get deliveries from other people's fleets, and those fleets have decided to electrify. So that's a trend which you're going to see across the country. And they needed charging stations there, and they needed them quick because they got the trucks. And so when they went to the utility, the utility said, well, that's going to take a long time. For 99 tractors, that's a lot of power, like 20 megawatts. And it's not something that a utility is used to receiving requests for. So it takes a long time to build up that infrastructure, as Jay said. But they did manage to find a solution with building a microgrid. So you may not have seen that. You said you've got a trash compactor, but as your fleets electrify more heavy duty, medium duty trucks, and the private sector does the same, they're going to run into that problem. So just realize that it can take time, and there are other solutions out there. So let's ask one other question, which is, we talked about finance as a barrier. We talked about kind of power as a barrier. What else is emerging as barriers to you as you go through this process? That's a question for Karen.
Yeah, funding certainly always a challenge. I do feel like we do have council support, so that's very important to understand where your support system's coming from. We have support from the utilities. They too have goals and metrics that they have to meet. One specific barrier that I'm facing that's new to Arizona is we have the HOV lanes, the high occupancy vehicle lanes, and we've been getting notices that a lot of EV owners bought their EVs solely to drive in the HOV lane. The state of Arizona, because those HOV lanes are managed by the feds are saying that there is a strong possibility they're going to take those HOV lanes away for single occupancy EV drivers. That's going to make a lot of folks angry, and that's going to do two things, in my opinion. It's going to shift the EVs over into the already congested non-HOV lanes by their potentially making our air quality worse. And I mentioned at the top of the hour, we have air quality challenges here in Phoenix. And then it's also I think it's going to have an impact on people buying EVs. Now, I don't know how much of an impact, but I've had employees come up to me saying that they solely bought an EV to drive in the EV in the HOV lane. Again, as Dr. J knows, we are a huge valley. City of Phoenix is 517 square miles. I'm almost as big as Rhode Island. You couple that with the valley, and it's like 50 miles to go from one end to the other just from Phoenix. That's not even the valley. So a lot of people really, really rely on those HOV lanes. And so if they go away for single occupancy EV drivers, that's a big barrier to adoption, in my opinion. That's a big one. And then funding's just the biggest, but we've got our plans, we've got our support. It's just how do we keep moving forward without the funding?
One of the things I mentioned at the beginning was alternative financing options. And I've seen models where you can lease an EV right now, right? But if you want to, I've seen models for school buses where you can have it as a service. So I don't know, Dr. J, if you've seen any examples of that, or John, you've come across it, but what do you think of alternative financing if the capital cost is going to go up and there's federal funding disappearing, what other options are there out there?
I'll give you it's pretty limited right now. There are some creative ways. I think there's more creative financing for the infrastructure than for the vehicles themselves, right? So there are a number of opportunities, or I think most right now are just in a short-term hold. But I think you'll see much more come out in regards to creative financing for the EV infrastructure that's required than the vehicles themselves.
So you're talking sort of project finance type model?
Yes.
Yeah. The one I'd call out is Highland Fleets up here in Massachusetts, which has got a model for electric school buses as a service, where they take the whole thing, the capex of the bus, but also the infrastructure, and just allow you to pay for that over time. So that's one example of looking at the whole picture.
Yeah, I mean, I'm at universities, right? So the biggest example for infrastructure was an organization that took over all the parking services for Ohio State University, including the infrastructure, and then had the long-term payback from permits, et cetera. And so I think you'll see that type of model transfer over for what we're talking about here.
Okay, that's a good thing to look out for. And then one of the other kind of categories of electric vehicles that I talked about in our prep call was regional transit authorities. And what we learned is that they've had federal grants for whatever vehicle, whether it be an ICE vehicle or an electric vehicle. But one of the regional transit authorities I spoke to wasn't sure if that was going to continue. Did they still have the choice? So I don't know, John, if you were able to find out anything about that and whether there's any update on the continuation of that type of funding.
No, Alistair, I was not able to find anything on that, specifically. I know it's frustrating, but I think everything right now is under review. And the more that people can speak up for these programs and express support and advocacy, increases their chances of sort of making it through, what's going on right now. But I don't have any firsthand knowledge of, I think, that particular program.
Okay. So thank you for checking there. I appreciate that. I'm going to see now if there are any questions for the audience. I don't see any in the Q&A box, but if anyone would like to ask a question now's the time to put it in the Q&A box. That's the only way that we're going to handle questions. We can't pass you the mic. So if anyone has a question, now's the chance. In the meantime, I'm going to go back to Karen and say, you've heard a lot of the discussion, and you know that the landscape is shifting. So it's going to get tougher, sort of planning financing. But is there anything else? You said you're going to dive into kind of helping spread the word, but any particular promotions that you're thinking about to help encourage others to follow on?
Yeah, I was just jotting down some ideas for if there's municipalities on the call to think about. There's purchasing collaboratives on, if you go to, there's another organization called Drive EV Fleets. And if municipality, I think it's driveevfleets.org, they work with Sourcewell contracts. So, and then municipalities are able to buy at discounts fleet vehicles, and they're not just light duty, they've got medium and heavy. So that's another resource to look at. So it's purchasing collaboratives. And then we have Arizona State University right in our backyard, and we partner with them just like Syracuse and other universities. So if municipalities have community colleges or institutions of higher learning, it's great to partner with them. They're always looking for projects. They can ask for grant funding as well. So that's just another opportunity to get some planning help, some resource help. I was talking with some other municipalities, and they have a funding, not a financing, but a funding structure called a green bank. So if, for instance, the water department needs to replace a light duty, and we all know that EVs are about, they can be anywhere from $8,000 to $10,000 more than an internal combustion. Let the department pay for the internal combustion price, and then the delta gets pulled out of a green bank. So if you've got this bank of funding, it makes up the difference between an ICE, an internal combustion, and an EV. So that's another opportunity to look at. We don't do that, but I thought that was a great creative way to do it. Again, check in with utilities for rebates and incentives. Rocky Mountain Institute, RMI, has got great resources. NREL, NREL's got great resources, and Argonne Labs. You know, one of the things that I came across is how much does it cost to put in a DC fast charger? The answer is always, it depends on how much power you have to pull, but you know, that can be, that's a big chunk of change. So if I get $1 million, that's probably going to be used all to put in DC fast charging. So you have to weigh do I put in a bunch of level 2s, or do I put in a couple DC fast? So that's always something to weigh.
I've got a question here for you,
Yeah.
so I'm going to interrupt you
Yeah.
there. But I'm going to come back to you, John, on the green bank thing afterwards. But so, question from the audience. We've got it.
Yeah.
A question for Karen. Does your fleet driver policy allow for domiciled vehicle privileges, particularly for light duty? Meaning, can they charge at home, and how do you deal with that?
Great question. We have not gotten there yet on a take-home policy. None of our EVs are eligible to be taken home. We have not stepped into the police fleet yet, transitioning police fleet. So all of the EVs stay at their city domicile facility. But I was just talking with someone the other day, and they were putting together a take-home policy. So let me do some research, and I can get that to you, Alistair, and you can disseminate it out, because that is a big question, take-home policy.
Yeah. I don't mind plugging the company that has a good solution for billing that, which is a member of ours, Move EV. So just check them out, Move EV, and they might be able to help you with the policy as well.
Hey, real quick, I just want to build on something for maybe some of the jurisdictions is, as what we've seen as some of the best management practices are jurisdictions that actually look to partner with other jurisdictions that they have similar border. So you can install your charging equipment right at the border with another jurisdiction, split the cost, if you will, and have it accessible for both jurisdictions or multi-jurisdictions. So that's again, don't think just parochially, but look at your partners and your neighbors, because there are some efficiencies that can be found by those type of actions.
Thank you, Jay. Good point. John, I'm going to circle back to you about the question on green banks. So I don't know if you were referring to like a local sort of green bank mechanism, or to one of these green banks which got funded out of the, I don't know which fund it came out of, but there was definitely some green bank funding, which has now been frozen. So have you heard, John, if there's any impact on the green banks? Any updates on that?
I think they are caught up, in the administration's, review. I mean, everything right now is caught up for review. Flowing from, the executive order on energy dominance that the administration issued within the first, I think, 72 hours of being sworn in. And I mean, there are larger questions here about, any administration's ability to impound funds, which Congress has approved and has appropriated, and, not trying to tie up this forum on this. I mean, some of these things will end up probably in the Supreme Court, to force, I think, the administration's hand to release funds that have already been appropriated. So that doesn't give anybody a lot of comfort that, their grant of whatever it is, $100,000, $1 million, $10 million, is kind of tied up in these larger discussions. But unfortunately, that is the world we're living in. And again, I do think that there is opportunities for advocacy, both through your local congressional representative and also other avenues as well. And I think Karen mentioned, and I had to smile when you talked about Arizona Public Service and Salt River. Those were organizations that I worked with 20, 25 years ago, and they are certainly not newcomers to electric vehicle deployment. The greater utility industry is a very, very powerful voice in Washington for a number of different issues, and they have already staked out their positions on the investment tax credit and production tax credit for large scale renewable energy deployment. I have not seen them take a position on the 30D and 30C tax credits, but they have put forward advocacy positions before, for electric vehicles in general. So I would encourage you to work through them. In relation to green banks, I mean, state green banks now are not new. I mean, not every state has one, but, more states have one than just California, New York, and Massachusetts. I mean, they are a much more prevalent mechanism within states. And I think to the degree that they received funding through the IRA, or they have received funding through state legislatures, now is the opportunity for them to kind of be an effective mechanism for electric vehicle deployment, either through, leasing programs, buy down programs, a number of other things, financing for infrastructure. I think it's a great opportunity now for those organizations to really stretch themselves in terms of electric vehicle deployment.
That's great. Thank you, John. Well, we're coming to the end of the webinar now. We've got a few minutes left, but I would like to give each of the speakers an opportunity to say, give one word to summarize what you're going to do next after this webinar with helping electrification of vehicles. So just see if you can summarize it in one word, and then I'm going to explain where you can download the paper from our website as well as from Dr. J's one. So let's go to you first, Karen. One word of what you're thinking about as you leave this webinar for your plans.
Well, the first word that came to mind was drink, but I don't think that's appropriate. I'll use a couple words. We're going to continue to move forward and push forward with where we can.
Excellent. Good to hear. Hopefully the guide will help you. Jay?
Partner. Partnering in providing the science and the advocacy so policymakers can make the best, most informed decisions and move this forward.
Excellent. Yeah, with partnerships in my name, I thoroughly approve of that concept as well. So that's great. And John, how about you?
Yeah, I would say something similar to Jay, but community. Obviously the federal government has led over the last 4 years in clean energy deployment and, the IRA. But now I think, leadership needs to be, shifting to states and municipalities and communities to take what's been done and really leverage it and learn, from each other. So this is not the first time that cycle has kind of played out, but I think we're clearly, in that phase right now, and we may be for the next 3 or 4 years.
That's helpful. So what I take away from your words actually sounds quite like what we're trying to do, which is act. So take action, keep going, to form an alliance, whether you're a formal member of our organization or not. We want to sort of foster that community of people who want to share best practices and help each other and partner. So thank you, Dr. J. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, John, for really inspiring thoughts. And I encourage the audience to follow up what was heard. We will share the recording. But also here's a QR code down the bottom left-hand corner where you can download the guidebook. So you can find it there, or you can find it on the website, which Dr. J showed earlier, dynamicslab.org as well. And if you want to learn more about us, you can also look at the top QR code there. So thank you again very much for attending today. And thank you once again to the speakers. And we look forward to perhaps another webinar, John, on the subject of what's happening at the federal level once the dust has settled after 100 days, which can't be long. All right.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you, Alistair.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.